Hello everybody! Today we are doing a quick watercolor of an apple using Da Vinci's Alizarin Crimson, Holbein Sap Green, Da Vinci's Burnt Umber, Holbein's Quinacridone Violet, and a Daniel Smith Payne's Gray. So 5 colors and hopefully will be in about 10 minutes. We also have just a normal pencil and a number 6 and a number 8 round watercolor brush for this. We're using Arches watercolor paper and we have some clean water and a paper towel handy. Now, I'm trying to start here with a flat wash. I was having a little bit of a hard time with the grain of the paper, so I did have to go back in and add some water. So it's not a perfect flat wash, but it's a good way to get started and lay down that initial pigment. And then we're starting to go back in with a wet on wet technique. So we're just trying to add pigment and trying to flesh out the colors in the right places. I did not include footage of my sketch, but it was very quick, about 30 seconds. And if you're looking for some quick tips, I just recommend that you don't oversimplify. Remember to think about what you're actually seeing rather than the motif of what you might think an apple looks like in your head. And remember that things are much more than basic shapes. An apple is not simply an oval or simply a circle. Now here and throughout the piece, I'm not worried about leaving harsh edges at the end of my detailing because it mimics the striation that you're going to find in an apple. And also when you're going wet on wet, it's fine to leave some of that granular texture. It's one of the hallmarks of what makes watercolor appealing. And also, again, imitates that kind of textural detail that you're going to get on the surface of the apple with its different colors kind of molting together. And here I'm just taking a little bit of paper towel and dabbing away some of the color, and that's going to help bring out those highlights. Remember that watercolor always dries a lot lighter than you lay it down, and the amount of water that you have on your brush is also going to significantly impact how light it dries because that's diluting the pigment that's going to end up drying on the paper. So always experiment and don't be afraid to go in a little heavy at first because it will dry lighter. I typically have a problem not laying down enough pigment in a single stroke and having to go back in. And that's to be avoided because it overworks the surface texture of your paper. And you can start getting pilling where the paper is, being lifted off. Or you can just get some undesirable mixing and lifting when you're trying to lay down pigment. So again, try to avoid overworking your paper. Here we're just adding some pigments onto the sides, and again that's going to indicate the depth of the apple, and we're just kind of taking some water and pulling that color in to lighten it as it goes in towards the apple, again to kind of give that perception that this object is round. Now you'll notice I just have some washi tape keeping this painting in place. Usually when you're doing a watercolor painting, you'll lay down either like a painting tape instead to help you try and avoid buckling, which is when the paper gets wavy under the weight of all the water. This washi tape doesn't help with that. Now I've been adding some stripes of color, again just trying to create the right tone, but also kind of mimic the striations that you get in an apple. And I did want to say I'm painting an apple pretty true to life here and not being too inventive with colors for the sake of simplicity. But when you're creating a piece, always feel free to experiment with different colors, textures, even drawing it in different styles. Don't feel like you always have to mimic real life or do what anyone is really demonstrating. Now, up until this point in the painting, the only paint that I've been using is Alizarin Crimson. I'm coming in here with some Umber, but again, yeah, the body of the apple is entirely Alizarin Crimson, and we're just using that violet later when we're doing some of the shadows or like the indicators of depth around the side and the bottom of the apple. Now you'll see that I'm bringing in a really desaturated burnt umber and some sap green down into around that core of the apple, around that stem. When you look at an apple, you'll see that it's kind of a dirty color, or it's kind of gray, green, brown, very light down there, so trying to mimic that. The stem and the leaf itself is a mixture of sap green and that burnt umber. We're just putting a little bit of burnt umber in there, and later on I'll put a little bit more burnt umber in the stem of the leaf and at the tip of the leaf to indicate that it's more in shadow than the other parts of it. Now I'm about done laying down all of the initial colors, so very soon I'll have a little jump here where I've let things dry a little bit. And at this point, I believe I had elapsed about 8 minutes, so when I came back, I only had a few minutes left on the clock. I did end up going over 10 minutes by a little bit, unfortunately. But what I'm hoping that you'll take away from this is that even if you just have a little bit of time on your lunch break or after work, you know, anytime in your busy day, you can always fit in a few minutes of watercolor or of any sort of creative pursuit. Now here you'll see as I'm brushing there's some texture at the end and beginning of my strokes. That's because I don't have enough water on my brush, and this is called dry brushing. So I don't end up keeping a lot of it, I go over a lot of it because in an apple it is generally pretty shiny and you don't want that kind of rough texture that indicates that it's a matte surface. But this is definitely something that you can experiment with in your own art, and it does help add a little bit of visual interest. Now, as I alluded to previously, I'm taking some of that violet and mixing it in with the Alizarin Crimson, and we're just using that in the areas of the apple that need to be a little bit darker, either on the sides or down towards the bottom where you're getting more shadow around the dips that happen around those curves. We're just, dropping in some pigment to make that a little bit darker. Now we are coming up at the end, so whether or not you are doing an apple of your own or painting along with me, I hope you find some time in your day for some creativity, and I hope you really enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye.